Welcome to JW3 Online. We're so glad that you've tuned in, and if you don't know who we are, JW3 are a one-of-a-kind Jewish community centre in London that's open to everyone. If you want to know more about us, like us on Facebook or YouTube, and check out the rest of our events online. We hope you enjoy the programme. Hi everyone, and welcome to Young JW3's latest series, Denomination, with me, Joe Hyman, and our guest this week, Rabbi Akiva Rosenblatt. We are a denomination, a nation of denominations made up of Jews of all different types and stripes, and we want to celebrate this. This series is here to take the stereotypes that you may have about communities other than your own and throw them out the window. We're here to learn about different types of Jews and learn more about communities different to our own, because we believe that unity comes from knowing each other, celebrating both where we're the same and where we're different. Each week we'll hear from an emerging Jewish leader and learn about their denomination, community, and what matters to them. If you're watching along, tell us what denomination you connect to and why. Or, if you don't, we would love to hear the conversation continue on our social media platforms. But for now, let's welcome Rabbi Akiva Rosenblatt. Hi, welcome, how are you?
Very good, thank you. Thank you, Joe, for having me on. Very honored to be here.
I'm glad to have you. First questions first. Let's throw it out there. Let's get the the question of the day out to our audience. Which denomination do you identify with? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that's an interesting question, Joe. It's not a straightforward answer, and I don't like labels too much, to be honest. I think it sort of limits us. But if I would have to put something on myself, I would say I'm an Orthodox Jew, religious Jew, feel very strongly about mitzvah observance and about Torah study and about tikkun olam, helping the world. I grew up in the Charedi system. I went through the Charedi education system, and that is something which is very close to my heart, but it's not the sum total of who I am.
I think that's really a wonderful answer, because I think that the denomination series wants to make clear that while denominational politics is part of our community, it's not the sum total of who people are, and I think that's really, really important to start off with that kind of energy. So before we jump into the big questions about kind of the community and the values that it holds, I'd love to hear just a little bit about you, how you became a rabbi, why you became a rabbi, and that journey, so our viewers can get a little sense of who you are.
Okay, so I'm a rabbi in a United Synagogue community, which is not a Charedi community, but I would say United Synagogue, broadly speaking, is more modern Orthodox community. And it's not the natural progression for someone like myself who goes through, I guess, the more Charedi system to end up in this type of position. But although I went through the Charedi system, I went to Charedi schools and yeshivas in yeshivot in Gateshead in Israel. I grew up in a home which was very focused on outreach. My father was and still is a rabbi and was very involved with outreach at the time. So we had Jews of all backgrounds come to our house for a Friday night dinner, for Shabbat lunch. And I think I really learned to appreciate people over there. I started to really feel like I love meeting people. I love connecting to people. And for me, that was a real passion of mine at the time. And at the same time, I felt very strongly about my Judaism. I felt very strongly about that which I knew was so valuable. And it was always on my mind, how am I going to merge those two together? And to me, a rabbi of a community was the answer. It was an ability to be able to share my appreciation for my Judaism, and at the same time be able to connect with people and really develop relationships. So it wasn't really a natural progression. I went to Potter's House Grammar School. I then went to Gateshead, where you just do intense studying from 7 in the morning to 11 o'clock at night. And I really feel that gave me a serious grounding in terms of my Torah knowledge, my religious knowledge. When I then moved on to Israel and decided, well, perhaps I want to look in the direction of becoming a rabbi, I started to think more seriously about it, went to take smicha over there as well. And I guess, in a way, if I'd look back and think to myself, what decisions did I make along the way? I'm not too sure. Sometimes I just look back and think, how did I end up over here? But actually, I'm really happy I'm here, and it's for me, it's a great opportunity to really connect to people and teach them more about what I value so much.
That's brilliant. Taking that desire to connect to people and share your religious passion is a wonderful kind of route in. And yeah, sometimes things aren't always so meticulously planned, but we end up in places, and it's beneficial for the people around us. Okay, so we've heard a little bit about you. Let's dive kind of deep into the denomination, and I'd love to hear a bit about kind of Charedi Judaism. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw you in the deep end here and give us the denomination minute timer, which we've been doing over the past few weeks with our other speakers as well. But it's a challenge. Tell us as clearly and kind of coherently as possible, what does the denomination stand for? What's its values? What does the community look like? 60 seconds starting from now.
Okay, so as ironic as this may sound, Charedi Judaism is a broad church. There are many different understandings and nuances of understanding within Charedi Judaism. So it's pretty impossible to encapsulate everything into 1 minute. But I would say, broadly speaking, number one, it's a meticulous observance of all the mitzvot, taking those really seriously. Number two, it's a commitment to and a passion for Torah study. So much so that it even often comes at the expense of earning a proper living as well. And I would say number three, more controversially, and again, this comes in all shapes and sizes and to, some larger degrees and some lesser degrees, but it's a skepticism, I guess, towards engagement with the outside world. Like I said, sometimes more and sometimes less. But that, I guess, broadly speaking, encapsulates Charedi Judaism. As I said, that's not the sum total of who I am, but that's how I understand the attitude of Charedi Judaism, what it's all about.
Great, with 3 seconds to spare. Impressive. I really appreciate, you kind of bringing the nuance and talking about how it's a broad church in many different ways in its own context, and those values of meticulousness, Torah, kind of religious study, and also a kind of a skepticism to the modern or outside world. But kind of there's lots of different ways that manifests in different communities. The next question I have is about the name Charedi, and where that comes from, and also what the history of the Charedi community is about. I mentioned this on all our episodes, that we think that denominations have been around forever, but there are kind of different groups that were in the kind of Talmudic times, and there are groups now that identify in different ways. Where does the Charedi community's name come from, or what does it mean? I understand that it's Hebrew, but and also what's its history? How long has it been around for?
Okay, well, that's a really good question. I think, historically, as you mentioned, there was really no such thing as denominations within Judaism. You were either a religious Jew or a Jew, actually, or you decided not to be a Jew. Once a Jew, always a Jew, but you decided to maybe convert to another faith. There was no such thing as really not denomination within Judaism itself. I think with the emancipation and, with the Haskalah Enlightenment movement, I guess, 19th century, 18th, 19th century, it started, these different groups started to emerge where you could identify as Jewish, but not necessarily be religious. And I think as a response to that, there emerged what's now known as, Charedi Judaism or religious Judaism, which is basically saying, look, we are Jewish and we practice our Judaism and we strongly believe in the observance of all the mitzvot. The Torah is timeless, which means that nothing really does change or nothing changes in the Torah, but yet timely is relevant to where we are. The word itself, chared, it comes from the word chared, which means to tremble, which comes from the verse, I believe, charedim leDvar Hashem, trembling before the word of God. And I think, where that word came from exactly, I'm not too sure. How it became the word to define Charedi Judaism, I'm not too sure. But I think what it really means to say is, look, we take the word of God seriously, and if he says something, then we're going to listen to it, and we're going to take that seriously. And that I guess is where the name came from and how it came to define Charedi Jews. But like I said, it's a fairly recent thing. It's a new thing. It's a response, I think, to the other groups that came about.
Really interesting, and I guess the etymology, the kind of the word behind the name and description of Charedi Jews, the idea of trembling and kind of that awe for the Torah text, which is believed to be kind of divine in the context of that community, is really, really fascinating.
Yeah, and I think just in terms of trembling, I don't think it's necessarily, we live in a constant with a paranoia about God. I think it's more the fact that, like I mentioned before, trembling means like there's an emotion behind it. It's not just an intellectual exercise or study. It's not just an interesting subject. It's life itself. And therefore, there's a seriousness behind it. But at the same time, it's not meant to be overbearing and turn you into, someone paranoid. That's interesting as well.
Yeah, as you mentioned, kind of that point. I thought it must be emotional. It's kind of something that is more embodied than just up here in one's head.
Yeah.
All right. So we've discussed a lot about the history of Charedi Judaism. And we've heard a little bit about kind of in the denomination minute about what it's all about. But what will be really helpful for our audience is to hear a little bit about what particular practices look like that are relatively common throughout different denominations. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what Shabbat looks like, what kashrut, food ritual, looks like, and what prayer, tefillah, or kind of what the synagogue looks like in Charedi Judaism.
Okay, so Shabbat's interesting because Shabbat might actually look quite similar, even if it's cross denomination. I guess Shabbat's families get together on a Friday night and they sing together and they have their chicken soup together. I think in religious Judaism, Charedi Judaism, there is a lot of focus around the Friday night table of Divrei Torah, which is sharing thoughts about the Torah portion for that week, and children will get up there and read their Devar Torah out at the table, and the fathers will test their children on the portion of the week. There's very much a focus on Torah study and Torah learning and understanding the portion of the week around the Friday night table, which is really nice. It's an opportunity for just the different generations to interact in that way. Shul is full of singing on Friday night. Friday night davening is really my favorite prayers of the week. And it's very quiet. People aren't driving cars. People aren't involved in any form of technology. So it's just quiet and peaceful and a opportunity for reflection and just connecting to one another and connecting spirituality to God.
Really, really interesting, and it's great to see how that principle of Torah study comes through into Shabbat as well, kind of that cross-generational, intergenerational learning kind of through that moment of Shabbat. What about kashrut and food rituals? What does that look like?
Okay, so kashrut's interesting. Like I said before, it's a broad church, so you're going to find the same thing is true about kashrut. People have different levels of stringencies when it comes to kashrut, even within the Charedi world itself. So you'll find that some people won't necessarily rely on a certain hechsher, which is like sort of the rabbinic approval of a certain product that's kosher. So you'll have a lot of politics about that sometimes. But really, food has become more of a thing, I guess, recently in I guess the world at large. But even within Charedi Judaism, there's a lot more focus on the taste and how amazing it is. Food, has never been such a focus. Really, obviously, it's been a focus for our festivals, and it's been it's what we connect with. But in terms of, the intricacies of each course and stuff like that, that's sort of like a new thing. But kashrut is important. Kashrut is something which people take very seriously, and people have different levels of what they consider to be kosher. So it's interesting how it all comes together, but somehow or another it works.
Interesting. And when it comes to tefillah, prayer, and a synagogue space, what does that look like? And what would can if you walked into a Charedi shul synagogue, what it would look like and how it would feel?
So prayer is like a serious time in the shuls. It's talking is strictly forbidden. One's not really allowed to talk at all during the service itself. And people are, by and large, again, there's obviously exceptions to everything, but quite focused on the prayers they're saying. What's nice is that most of the people that actually understand the words they're saying as well, which means that it's not just Hebrew, which they don't relate to, but it's very much a language which they're comfortable with. So I think people recognize, and again, this is something which is you can't generalize about this, because sometimes people go through just the rote of things without thinking about it. But I think people recognize that they're talking to God. They recognize that that is what prayer is ultimately all about. Sometimes it's difficult to not get distracted by different things, but that is, like I said, it's a serious time. It's when people really pour their hearts out in a way. There's deep emotion going on over there sometimes in the shul. People literally are crying, when they're praying, and I think it's special to be able to see that people actually connect to those prayers and really feel them.
Really interesting. And what does kind of the Beit Knesset, the synagogue, look like? What's the setup if someone didn't know what it looked like or had never been to a Charedi prayer space? What would it look like?
So it's a large sanctuary. The chazzan, the leader of the service, will stand at the front. I know some shuls the chazzan will stand in the middle, but in the Charedi shul, chazzan will stand right at the front of the shul, not up high. Sometimes in shuls you'll see that the chazzan is standing up on on the bima, on some sort of platform in the middle, but the chazzan is actually standing just on the same height as everyone else. Men and women are separate in Orthodox shuls. And what else can I say? I mean, that's pretty much all that goes on in there.
Okay, great. Wonderful. I think that's given our audience a sense of what these different practices look like. And this is an opportunity for our audience to let us know what their practices look like. So in the comments, if you're watching and you haven't been watching over the past few weeks, let us know what your practices are, what they look like, and how they may differ from Rabbi Akiva's and the communities that he's been involved in, or they may be similar in some ways. But add your own voice to this conversation. Let's talk about practices and beliefs, and how those form kind of a community like a Charedi community. And does someone need to believe in particular things or observe particular things to be part of the Charedi community?
So, the question of identity is a really interesting one. I mean, nowadays it's interesting the way identity works. It's that you can sort of identify with something in all sorts of ways. But I think when it comes to Charedi Judaism, or to religious Judaism, there are 13 principles of faith, which Maimonides lays out pretty clearly, which I think everyone would agree with are things which every sort of religious Jew would accept. And I think it's also a commitment to. I think the commitment's the right word over here, because everyone makes mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. There is no human being that's perfect in the world. But I think a commitment to everything the Torah says. So a commitment to every single one of the mitzvot. And I can't stress enough that there is no human being in the world that gets everything right, within Charedi Judaism as well. But I think it's the commitment which was most important over there. Are you committed to it, or are there some mitzvot which you just say to yourself, well, I don't really see that one to make any sense, so I'm just not going to do that one. So it's the 30 principles of faith and the commitment to all the mitzvot, I think.
Really great. I mean, what are those 13 principles of faith? What do they look like? I mean, don't tell us the full 13. I think for those who may not know Maimonides' 13 principles of faith, what are kind of some of the key ones, just to understand what are these beliefs that underpin the community? Okay,
so I'll just pick out some of the key ones, but I think number one, belief in God, first and foremost. You've got the belief in the fact that the Torah is divine. The Torah, as we have it, is the very same Torah that God gave to Moses at Mount Sinai, 3,333 years ago. So a recognition of the fact that this hasn't changed and never will change, and that it is divine as well. And lots of other things along the way. So things which we don't really struggle with nowadays, but the fact that the oneness of God, there is no multiplicity of gods. It's just one God, monotheism. The prophecy of Moses, then it's getting a bit, as you said, a bit intricate, but I think those give a sense, the world to come, the fact that there is a world to come, that this is the world we live in now is not the sum total of our existence, but when we move on from this world, we go to a spiritual world, the fact that there is going to be a Messiah at some point, hopefully sometime soon, but the fact that the world will have a redemption. Those are all elements of those 13 principles of faith.
That's really eye-opening, I think, for our audience to understand what's behind those principles of faith. And yeah, 13 is a lot, but they seem really, really fascinating. Let's jump into the question of denomination, which is, and if this is about taking away stereotypes. And I'd love to understand what the biggest stereotype people have about people kind of who grew up in the kind of the space that you grew up in. What's that stereotype that you have the most? And importantly, what's the emotion that brings up for you? What does that make you feel when someone has a stereotype about your denominational community?
Well, I think people tend to think of religious Jews as closed-minded and quite judgmental as well. I think those are sort of two sides of the same coin, but closed-minded and judgmental. And whilst that definitely may be true of some religious Jews, I've met, secular Jews or just people who are pretty closed-minded themselves. And I've also met religious Jews who are pretty open-minded, more open-minded sometimes than secular people I'd come across. So I really feel like it's not part and parcel of being Charedi or being religious to be closed-minded. I've met some incredible people within the Charedi world who are incredibly open-minded, non-judgmental at all, really feel like what they're doing makes sense and is right, but yet are also always willing to listen to other viewpoints and other ways that people see things. How does it make me feel? I think it's quite hurtful sometimes when people just write you off as someone who's a bigot or closed-minded, where they haven't heard you speak yet. I'd like to think that once I open my mouth, people get to hear from someone who is non-judgmental at all. I mean, I really believe in what I do. I really believe in Judaism, and I value it strongly. But at the same time, I really enjoy connecting to other people, whether or not they're of the same background of myself. So I think that what connects us all is our humanness, and even religious Jews are human, which is sometimes something which people don't really see. But there is a human being behind every single human, beside every single human being in the world. And I think just recognizing that will, open corridors of just connection and respect.
I think that's really important, and I think in the framework of our kind of discussion about denominations, it's important to remind us a kind of B'Tselem Elohim, the kind of everyone's created in the image of God, and there's a shared humanity. Mm-hmm. And I love the point that you made that people may see Charedi Jew and they'll kind of write them off, but once give someone a chance to open their mouth and mm-hmm. actually listen to who they are as a human being, because it may be a little bit different than you would expect.
Yeah.
I really, really appreciate that viewpoint. So we've spoken about kind of the stereotype of how people perceive you, but I want to kind of throw it out to other communities and say, what's one thing a community is doing outside of yours that your community isn't doing that you really value or is exciting to you, and you may want to incorporate in your community, or you may just want to kind of say, I really value that, and we're not in a place to be able to do that?
So, I look around me and I see that there are incredible ideas everywhere from all sorts of different people. And I'm always reminded of the Mishnah in Ethics of the Fathers, Pirkei Avot, which says, Ezehu Chacham, who is the wise person, Halomed Mikol Adam, the one who learns from everyone. And I think that having good ideas or being good is non-denominational. So I don't, there is no rules about when I look at something and think whether that's a good idea or not. So I like I keep on saying, I don't know if there's one specific thing which I can pinpoint and say, that's a fantastic idea, which I see in someone else doing, which we ought to do. Because I think that we all subconsciously see what other people are doing and sort of come up with ideas which mirror that sometimes, or come up with similar ideas. And I like to think of myself as a type of person that really learns from everyone and gains inspiration from what people are doing. So there are different social action projects out there. outward-looking ones are really trying to help those beyond our community, which I think are really, really nice ideas, especially during the current pandemic where you have, all these food banks and different things which have opened up. Those are really good ideas, which I strongly value. And I think that as a Jewish people, we have a responsibility, not just for ourselves, but for the world at large.
100%. And I think that principle of acceptance that actually that goodness is non-denominational, and that we even if we don't intend to, we learn from others just by virtue of being part of a broader community. And it's interesting to think about kind of how those ideas, I guess, influence each community as they do in maybe more invisible ways that we don't really see. Really, really interesting. So, final question, and this is going to be, what does the future look like? What do you think the biggest priorities for you, but also for your kind of your community and maybe the Charedi community? It's a big question because it's like there's
lots of different
there's complexity in your identity, which is important and existent in everybody's kind of identity. But I guess let's hone in on you. What are the three biggest priorities from your perspective in the next 10 years for your community?
Okay, so let's go back to the Charedi community we were talking about, because I can't speak on their behalf. And like I said, I don't think I fit into one specific box, myself. So whilst I strongly, identify with the value system that they have, I can't definitely, not a spokesperson, but something, things I've been thinking about, or perhaps areas where we might be looking into, is emotional well-being. I think people have had in the past this conception that being religious makes you immune from emotional distress or just mental health issues. And although I think we've come a long way, I think there's still a lot more we can achieve in terms of being more comfortable with the fact that people go through things, and it's not something which you need to hide. It's something which is okay. And like I mentioned, all back, we are all human beings, and we all have that humanness. And part of being human means that you're going to make mistakes, and that you're not perfect, and that there's going to be things which you come up with and have challenges. And those challenges are okay. So somehow integrating that into the education system instead of waiting for crises to happen and then have intervention, I think it would be a lot more helpful if these were things which were discussed from the outset. Kids would be taught about emotional well-being and things like that, without being told about it when they go through something really, really difficult. That's number one. Number two, I think it also relates to the education system itself. I feel like as a response to the Holocaust, we pretty much had this one-size-fits-all system, which was, look, we've lost an incredible amount. We need to rebuild this nation fast and strong. Otherwise, who knows what the future, what the future holds. And indeed, there were incredible Torah scholars, and the religious world boomed after the Holocaust. But I think there are kids who don't necessarily fit in that one-size-fits-all system. And it isn't a one-size-fits-all system. And if there is a way of allowing kids to go down different avenues or different paths, it's like, well, not everyone is cut out to be a rabbi. And perhaps there are other paths one can take, still remaining religious and strongly religious Jews, but at the same time, recognizing there are other opportunities for them, not just being stuck to having to learn for the rest of their, for the rest of their life. I think that's a really important thing to be thinking about. And see, it's all about education, I think. So I said emotional well-being. I spoke about the workforce as well. I think perhaps, I don't know, again, I can't speak on their behalf, but seeing the humanness in other people, I think is really, really important. Other people who aren't as religious as ourselves, just finding that connection and really appreciating people for who they are, I think is something which could potentially be another focus as well. So I think, all those three fall into the category of education, but that is something which I feel quite strongly about.
Those three kind of future focused points are incredible. I think, thinking about education broadly in regards to emotional well-being, in regards to offering a less one-size-fits-all education system, and kind of thinking more broadly about how education can kind of impact different people and see the possible humanity in kind of lots of different types of people is really, really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to note that when we talk about denominations, you are not a representative of everything, and the people that we speak to in this series are not representative of their denominations. They're individuals with their own thoughts, opinions, and experiences, which will be informed by their own lives. And I think we can't go away from this series thinking we've known and learned everything about this denomination. This is an invitation for everyone here to learn a little bit more and kind of see the humanity in others. And I think that's really, really been seen through how you've been talking about Charedi Judaism, but also your own personal journey. So thank you, Rabbi Akiva Rosenblatt. Thank you to our viewers. Make sure to subscribe and like us on YouTube and Facebook to make sure that you can catch up with other episodes and future series at JW3. And make sure to join our Young JW3 Community Facebook group, where we keep up to date with all Young JW3 events and series and everything that's going on. We look forward to seeing you soon. Have a lovely day.